10 o'clock, July 31st, 1914. The New York Stock Exchange is supposed to sound like a storm. Today it sounds like a church after a funeral. Footsteps click and echo on marble. The air tastes of coal dust and ink. Somewhere outside, carriage wheels rattle over cobblestone, but in here the noise is strangled by worry. A brass clock on the wall crawls toward the opening bell. The second hand sweeps, unbothered, as if Europe is not mobilizing, as if telegrams are not arriving every hour with fresh declarations of war. Under the great skylight, men in dark suits cluster in uneasy knots. Their collars are wilted in the July humidity, their cigars unlit between their fingers. The click and chatter of the ticker machines has slowed to a stutter. Paper tape curls out of them, spilling over the edges of tables like pale entrails from a wounded animal, then falls silent. At the center, near the rostrum, a brass bell hangs ready. R. H. Thomas, president of the exchange, stands beside it with his hand resting lightly on the rope. He can feel the fibers against his palm, rough with the sweat and oil of 1,000 mornings. The bell is the heartbeat of the world's prices. If he pulls, the ritual begins. If he does not, the pulse stops. On a nearby pillar, a trading post plaque bears the number and initials for a major railroad stock, the enamel worn where hands have brushed it for years. Beneath it, a handwritten order ticket for that same railroad lies folded, a customer's instruction to sell before it's too late. The ink is still fresh. The ticket will never be executed. Someone has stamped one word across it in hurried purple letters, cancelled. At Thomas's elbow, a young man in Treasury livery shifts his weight from foot to foot. He has come from Washington overnight on the first train, his fingers still smelling faintly of locomotive smoke and coffee burned in a station urn. In his inner pocket, the paper from the Secretary of the Treasury is damp with sweat, the red seal blurred at the edges. The orders are simple in words and enormous in consequence: hold the financial line. Do not let American gold pour out to feed Europe's war. The clock shows 2 minutes to 10. If the exchange opens, telegraph wires will scream with sell orders from London, Paris, Berlin, if their markets haven't closed already. European investors, desperate for cash to pay for mobilization, will dump American stocks in a frenzy. Payment will be demanded in gold, the lifeblood of the world's currency system. Ships are already loading out in the harbor, holds ready for bullion. Let the selling run too long, and America's gold reserves drain away by the shipload. The country could stagger into a financial crisis before it has even decided whether to fight. Honor says the exchange must open. For decades, New York has prided itself on staying open through panics and scandals. Prices may fall, fortunes may vaporize, but the market speaks. Now the very credibility of that promise hangs from the rope in Thomas's hand. Around him stand the captains of Wall Street, partners from J. P. Morgan and Company, Kuhn Loeb, National City. In their heads, they are tallying columns no one can see, the American railroads and utilities funded by European savings, the loans coming due, the gold already promised. Opportunity glints in their calculations: if Europe must liquidate at fire sale prices, someone in New York can buy, but danger looms larger. A panic would burn everyone. Somewhere beyond these walls, millions of small savers are at work in offices and factories, unaware that their pensions, their insurance policies, the endowments of their colleges and charities, are silently assembled on this floor like troops on parade. Their fates will be decided in the next few minutes by men they will never meet. Thomas feels the clock tick over to 1 minute. The messenger from Washington clears his throat, but the president already knows. All morning, dispatches have arrived from other capitals. In Vienna, Berlin, Paris, the exchanges have closed their doors. A cable from London has just confirmed the unthinkable: the London Stock Exchange, the world's clearing house, has shut its floor. The world's price signal is going dark, city by city, like lamps being turned off down a long corridor. Now it is New York's turn. Thomas lifts his hand off the rope. He does not ring the bell. Instead, he nods to a clerk, who walks to the chalkboard and, in careful block letters, writes the words that will ricochet outward through the telegraph lines: New York Stock Exchange closed until further notice. On that morning, the most powerful market in the New World stops itself mid-breath. A trading post plaque hangs unused, a handwritten sell order dies unborn. These scraps of metal and paper become witnesses. They mark the moment when a marketplace ceased to be neutral ground and became a fortress gate slammed shut while the world outside caught fire. The question that hangs in the stillness is not just whether this is wise policy. It is older and sharper: when does a market cease to be a place where prices are discovered and become instead a weapon, a rampart, or a casualty in a larger war? To answer, we have to move backwards through time, following the paper trail from that cancelled New York order ticket to an older parchment, in another port city, where empire first learned that shares could buy cannon. Amsterdam, 1602. The air around the damn square smells of tar, wet wool, and spices unloaded from the Indies. In a counting house by the canal, a clerk unrolls a sheet of parchment. The letters across the top are ornate, flourished, almost military in their precision, Verenigd Oost-Indisch Company, United East India Company. A wax seal gleams red. This is a VOC share certificate. It does not represent sacks of nutmegs sitting in a warehouse. It represents something more abstract and more dangerous, a claim on future voyages, future convoys, future skirmishes in harbors half a world away. Outside, the Amsterdam Exchange is not yet a marble hall. It is an open-air courtyard, crowded with men in broad-brimmed hats shouting prices. They barter in shares of the VOC, the West India Company, the city's loans. Horses jostle nearby. The cries of gulls mix with the shouts of brokers. There is no ticker tape, only chalk marks and memory. But the logic that will govern Wall Street 3 centuries later is already forming. The Dutch Republic is small. Its enemies are not. The Portuguese and Spanish have been in Asia for a century, jealously guarding their spice routes. To survive and profit, the Dutch need fleets, forts, and permanent garrisons. No individual merchant can afford to risk a whole convoy to monsoon and pirates. So they invent a machine, the joint stock company. Many investors pool small sums. In return, they hold these new certificates, each a tiny sliver of a distant arsenal. With these shares, the VOC hires shipwrights and gunners, raises fortifications at Batavia and elsewhere, fields soldiers to guard warehouses and coerce local rulers. Capital raised in Amsterdam hardens into oak hulls, iron cannon, and disciplined men. The stock market's first great corporation is not a bakery or a weaver, it is a quasi-state, an arm of empire, firing broadsides financed by shopkeepers and townsmen who have never seen the ocean beyond the Zuiderzee. From the start, markets are not just casinos. They are artillery foundries of maritime empire. The trading floor is an armory of promises. Each share certificate is a piece of ammunition, loaded into the breech of a future ship. Where there is promise, there is also fever. Within a generation, Amsterdam tastes its first speculative frenzy. It is not yet about shares, but about flowers, tulips whose bulbs trade like futures contracts. In smoky taverns, men pledge next year's wages for the right to a rare striped bloom. Prices rise until a single bulb is said to be worth a canal house. Then confidence stutters, buyers cannot be found, contracts are abandoned. The mania collapses. The crash of tulip prices in the 1630s is messy, but contained. It does not topple the Republic. Yet it leaves behind a lingering scent, the idea that markets can be whipped into madness by rumor and hope. That idea will return, more dangerous, when what's at stake is not flowers, but the debts of empires. London, 1719. Exchange Alley behind the Royal Exchange is thick with tobacco smoke and gossip. Coffeehouses are cramped war rooms. On one table lies a fresh share certificate of the South Sea Company. Its paper is fine, its engraving respectable. The company promises to shoulder a mountain of British government war debt in exchange for monopoly trading rights in Spanish America, a region its directors barely understand and scarcely trade with. In Parliament, men argue about sinking funds and annuities. On the alley, the only number that matters is today's price. It rises with every rumor, a new treaty, a new concession, a clever restructuring of old obligations. Aristocrats mortgage estates to buy shares. Clerks buy slivers on credit. London's Exchange Alley becomes a battlefield of pamphlets and whispers. Across the Channel, France rides its own missile, John Law's Mississippi Company, promising wealth in Louisiana to pay for France's debts. Both schemes depend on belief that colonial riches will be enough to justify prices detached from any tally of ships or cargo. For a while, the belief holds. Women in silk and men in powdered wigs jostle outside the Rue Quincampoix, trading scraps of paper that command more respect than coin. Then, slowly, reality leaks in. There are not enough profits, not enough silver from mines that never quite live up to their brochures. Prices falter. The rush to sell begins. Panic is a physical thing, crowds pressing against a doorway, hands waving certificates, faces slick with sweat. When the collapse is over, fortunes are gone, reputations ruined. In London, the word bubble becomes part of the language of politics. The South Sea affair will scar British law for generations, breeding committees and statutes aimed at taming joint stock excess. Suspicion takes root, that stock markets are rigged games, instruments for insiders in powdered wigs to shear the ignorant. But even as the gambling den metaphor blooms, states do not abandon markets. They learn from them. They study how 1,000 small purchases can be marshaled to move mountains of debt, and they file the lesson away for war. In the 19th century, the battlefield shifts from the sea lanes to the interior of continents. The weapon is no longer a galleon, it is a railroad. Iron rail and steam locomotive promise to bind empires together, to move raw materials, troops, and food with a speed that would have astonished a VOC skipper. But rails are expensive. You cannot lay 1,000 miles of track on a merchant's savings alone. Britain in the 1840s falls in love with railways. Prospectuses pile up on the breakfast tables of shopkeepers and clerks. In one terraced house in Manchester, a small investor in 1845 sits under a gas lamp, spectacles slipping down his nose, reading about a proposed line that will cut through green fields and sleepy villages. The printer's ink smudges his fingers. The map at the back is precise and seductive, the dividends promised, generous. He signs his name, sends a check, and receives, weeks later, a share certificate with neat copperplate entries and an embossed seal. But the surveyors never finish their work. The tools lie in a muddy field, abandoned. The line will never be built. The certificate, once a ticket into the future, becomes expensive wallpaper. Railway mania sends iron and hope across the map. Some lines become vital arteries of commerce and military logistics, others remain dotted lines on forgotten plans. When confidence breaks, it is not just gamblers who suffer. Banks wobble. Foundries close. Households pull in their spending. The crash ripples outward. 3 decades later, in 1873, Vienna's stock exchange trembles. Credit Anstalt, stuffed with railroad securities, strains under the weight of speculation gone sour. When it falters, the shock travels along credit channels to Berlin, to London, to New York. Brokers on Wall Street learn new vocabulary, Panic of '73. A cancelled railroad share, its face value now meaningless, becomes a ghost. Overlay it with a freight map and the picture sharpens. By then, the rails already in the ground carry coal, grain, soldiers. Even in crisis, the steel skeleton remains, a strategic asset that will be used for future wars. Out of these crises, states learn another lesson: when markets seize up, the political cost can be lethal. Unemployment, hunger, protests, these are the tinder of revolution and reaction. In Germany, Bismarck seizes the moment to argue for social insurance, binding workers more tightly to the state so they do not look to socialism or street barricades for salvation. The stock market crash becomes a chapter in a larger story: how governments domesticate capitalism to stay in power. By 1914, this learning is deeply embedded. Governments understand that markets are not polite sidelines. They are mobilization engines. Britain has long used its London capital market, the world's most trusted, to float consols, fund naval expansions, and roll over the debts of empire. France leans on Paris for loans to build fortresses and rail links in the east. Investors in New York can buy Russian bonds, Argentine rails, Balkan loans. The globe is webbed with obligations scrawled in ink, denominated in sterling, francs, and dollars. Then, in late July of 1914, the diplomatic machinery fails. Austria-Hungary sends its ultimatum to Serbia. Russia mobilizes. Germany follows. Each government, reading its own timetables, rushes to get men to the frontier. Mobilization is not just a matter of trains and horses, it is a matter of cash. Soldiers must be paid, suppliers compensated, foreign creditors reassured. Gold is still the anchor for trust. Investors, sensing danger, liquidate. In Vienna, the Bourse closes its doors on July 27. In Berlin and Paris, officials do the same. London, the supposedly unshakable hub, manages to stay open a few more days, until July 31, when fear overwhelms tradition and the London Stock Exchange shuts. Telephones in New York relay the news like artillery reports: the great ally has gone dark. New York's governing committee meets in urgent session. Minutes from that day read like orders between generals, discussions of enemy selling, of preserving gold reserves, of holding the line. Treasury cables speak of extraordinary measures. Private wires from J.P. Morgan's offices weigh the risk that European houses, desperate for liquidity, will dump American securities on a scale never seen before. When the exchange closes that morning, it is not an act of cowardice. It is an act of defense. By shutting the doors, the committee prevents a fire sale that would have forced gold to sail out of New York Harbor in armored bags, leaving the United States financially exposed just as its role as arms supplier and creditor to the Allies is about to expand. Markets become fortifications. Closing the exchange is like cutting telegraph lines before battle, denying the enemy information and access. What looks, from the outside, like the failure of capitalism is, from the inside, an attempt to husband strength. War does not end the intertwining of markets and strategy, it intensifies it. Britain and America discover the power of mass subscription to war bonds. Posters blossom on walls, a stern Uncle Sam pointing his finger, "I want you to buy Liberty bonds." In a Midlands town, a British factory worker stands in line clutching coins and a small form. Somewhere else, a ledger in a naval shipyard records wages paid directly out of war loan proceeds. Each bond is a pledge from a citizen to a belligerent state, a voluntary draft of savings instead of bodies. In Germany, unable to access London's global market once war begins, the government leans heavily on domestic loans and, later, on plundered resources from occupied territories. German war loan posters, bright with eagles and appeals to patriotism, line the streets. The underlying arithmetic is merciless. When the war ends in defeat, the debts remain, one of the many grievances that radicals will exploit. After the armistice, the world staggers into the 1920s. In New York, the ticker machines that fell silent in 1914 now chatter with manic energy. Margin accounts let investors buy stocks with borrowed money. Radios crackle with news, the telegraph wires hum with orders. The roaring 20s feel like a permanent rally. Stocks only go up is not yet a catchphrase, but it might as well be. On the floor of the exchange in October 1929, paper drifts knee-deep. Telephones ring unanswered. Clerks shout, gesturing with sheaves of sell orders. The ticker lags minutes, then hours behind the reality of collapsing prices. The physical sensation is of a machine overclocked, overheating. By Black Tuesday, the illusion shatters. The crash does not cause the Great Depression alone, but it helps cripple government's fiscal capacity, undermines confidence in capitalist democracies, and feeds resentment and extremism in societies already strained by post-war debt and reparations. In Germany, the economic chaos of the 1920s, capped by global depression, creates fertile ground for the Nazis' poisonous promises. Once again, a speculative mania and its aftermath tilt political fate. This time, states do more than close exchanges for a few days. They redesign the battlefield. In Washington, lawmakers passed the Securities Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. They create the Securities and Exchange Commission, an institutional general staff to oversee this battlefield of finance. Prospectuses must now disclose, brokers must register, manipulation is outlawed. It is an attempt to impose rules of engagement on a front that has too often devolved into a free-for-all. After 1945, the smoke clears over ruined cities, and a new contest begins, the Cold War. New York, not London, becomes the command center of the capitalist bloc. Marshall Plan funds flow to rebuild Europe, financed by American taxpayers and by bond markets that absorb massive government issuance. European stock exchanges, shattered or discredited, slowly revive under U.S. tutelage. In the 1970s, another front opens, oil. The petroleum exporters, enriched by price shocks, park their surpluses in Western banks. These petrodollars are recycled into loans to Latin American governments, into treasury bonds, into corporate paper. Wall Street and the City of London become custodians of global energy rents. A decision in Riyadh or Tehran about oil output now ripples through the trading screens of Manhattan and the city. The proceeds fuel both welfare states and weapons systems. At the same time, the front line of market participation shifts from the clubby inner circle to the mass of workers. Pension funds, mutual funds, and later index funds gather the savings of teachers, nurses, firefighters, factory workers. Their contributions are pooled into enormous reservoirs of capital. Names like CalPERS in California or Norway's sovereign wealth fund appear in the registries of corporations across the world. These funds, in turn, buy stakes in everything from railroads to arms manufacturers to technology giants. A teacher in Ohio may hold, through a retirement plan, a microscopic share in a company that makes drones used over a foreign battlefield. A nurse in Tokyo may own a slice of a logistics conglomerate that moves NATO equipment. The old image of the stock market as a room full of men in top hats is gone. The new reality is a mesh of algorithms and institutions, where the owners of capital are millions of individuals who rarely know where their money sleeps at night. At each stage of this history, certain blueprints repeat. The first is mobilization. From the VOC's convoys to Allied war loans, the pattern is the same: use markets to turn scattered private savings into concentrated strategic power. The joint stock corporation and limited liability were not invented by philosophers, they were battlefield improvisations, ways to fund fleets, build railroads, rearm for looming conflicts. The casino is real, but it is noise around a deeper signal, the ability to mobilize resources at scale. The second blueprint is overconfidence and moral hazard. During railway mania, the South Sea bubble, the 1920s boom, elites and ordinary investors alike convinced themselves that their era's story guarantees perpetual growth. Colonies will pay. Rail will knit the nation and pay for itself. Industrial expansion will never end. When the tide turns, the same governments that extolled private risk step in to socialize losses, to rescue critical banks, to maintain credit, to prevent political catastrophe. Each rescue teaches future players that the state will defend the system when it is truly threatened. There is a cost. Ruined households line up at soup kitchens. Parties fall. Regimes totter. In some places, that vacuum is filled by dictators, in others by revolutionaries. The map of the 20th century's coups and fascist takeovers is speckled with countries where financial crisis broke faith between rulers and ruled. A third blueprint is less visible, the hidden cartographers. Markets look, from the outside, like crowds, the roaring floor, the scrolling ticker. But the underlying battle map is drawn by a smaller group. States decide when to open or close exchanges, who may trade, which foreign investors are welcome and which must be shut out. Central banks calibrate interest rates and liquidity, deploying arcane tools that determine whether money is cheap or scarce. Regulators design rules for leverage, disclosure, and risk. Giant institutional investors, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, asset managers, move tens or hundreds of billions in slow arcs across sectors and continents. On the surface, it is liquidity management, prudential regulation, portfolio allocation. Beneath that neutral language lie decisions about which industries will thrive, which regions will get rail or fiber or ports, and which wars can be afforded. There is a turning point embedded in this story. Once, the stock exchange was a physical room, marble columns, paper tickets, voices hoarse from shouting. You could stand in it, taste the sweat in the air, smell the ink. You could walk outside and look up at the facade where the world's fates were being bartered. Now, the battlefield is invisible to the naked eye. It lives in server racks humming in warehouses on the outskirts of cities, in fiber optic cables on the seabed, in compliance documents few citizens ever read. Algorithms trade in microseconds, arbitraging minuscule differences in price. The bell still rings in New York, but much of the real war is elsewhere. Citizens, meanwhile, still think of the market as a distant casino, a graph on the evening news, an app that flashes red or green. In reality, their pensions, their mortgages, even their city's water bonds march across this battlefield every day, deployed by others in campaigns they rarely see. The cost of this misunderstanding is high. If voters do not grasp that markets are engines of strategy, then decisions about war contracts, climate risk, and infrastructure priorities will be made without their informed consent. Look at today's wars and you can see the old patterns replaying in sharper resolution. When Russia invades Ukraine, stock prices of Western defense contractors jump within hours. Analysts speak of increased order visibility. Governments, pledging aid and rearmament, issue more bonds. Those bonds are bought by the same mutual funds and pension schemes that hold your retirement. Sanctions become a form of financial siege. Cutting a bank off from SWIFT is like severing its supply lines. Freezing a central bank's foreign reserves is the 21st century equivalent of seizing its bullion shipments on the high seas. These are not metaphors, they are deliberate tactics, drawn from playbooks that stretch back to that morning in 1914 when exchanges closed to control gold outflows. In the Middle East, in the Pacific, in any region where tension rises, prices move before troops. Oil futures twitch. Insurance premiums on shipping lanes climb. Defense stocks edge higher. Behind those numbers are decisions in finance ministries, central banks, and investment committees. A handful of people in quiet rooms adjust interest rates, change margin requirements, revise risk models. Their decisions will indirectly shape how long a war can be sustained, which side can borrow cheaply, whether a fragile economy tips from stress into crisis. The same dynamic is at work in the less dramatic but equally consequential arena of climate and infrastructure. In the 19th century, the question was, which valleys get rail lines, and which remain isolated? The answer determined which towns became industrial hubs and which dwindled. Today, the question is, which regions get renewable energy grids, high-speed internet, flood defenses, ports that can handle new shipping patterns? These are decided, in large part, through bond ratings, stock valuations, and investor risk models. A town considering seawalls must borrow, the interest rate it pays depends on the judgment of distant analysts. A developing country wanting solar farms competes with fossil fuel projects for capital. The battlefield bias is clear. Money flows toward what is immediately profitable under current rules, not necessarily what is strategically vital for citizens decades from now. We see echoes of railway mania in today's hype cycles around green tech, electric vehicles, artificial intelligence. There is real necessity. These technologies may well be crucial for survival and prosperity, and there is familiar overpromising. Prospectuses and pitch decks replace parchment share certificates, but the structure is the same: bold maps of future networks, confident projections, a thin line between vision and illusion. And you, whether you know it or not, are enlisted. Most people watching this hold some exposure to markets: a workplace retirement plan, a pension entitlement, a mutual fund, an insurance policy. Your savings may finance a foreign government's debt, back a firm supplying weapons systems, or own shares in shipping companies that carry grain, oil, or refugees. Your money is not idle. It is on a battle map somewhere, arrayed in a portfolio, assigned risk weights, nudged toward or away from certain regions and sectors by algorithms and human committees. The meeting where that map is drawn probably takes place in a conference room with fluorescent lighting, stale coffee, and a speakerphone, not in a marble hall. But the effect is the same as in Amsterdam, in London, in New York in 1914. Private savings are being mobilized for public outcomes, for better or worse. Whether you welcome it or recoil, you are a conscript in financial campaigns that shape borders, wars, and the climate. The only question is whether you recognize your enlistment. This matters because the power to halt or redirect these campaigns still rests, in extremis, with governments. During the initial COVID panic, exchanges around the world imposed trading halts, circuit breakers, to slow the plunge. Some countries briefly banned short selling. In nations facing coups or currency collapses, stock markets have been shut overnight, banks temporarily closed, withdrawal limits imposed. The tactic from 1914 survives, updated: when the strain grows too great, the doors can still be locked. Imagine a future crisis, a major cyber attack that corrupts trading data, a conflict between nuclear-armed states that escalates beyond anyone's plan, a sudden climate shock that wipes out a coastal financial center. In those moments, the screens may go dark. Settlement systems might be paused. Exchanges could be closed not just city by city, but across continents. The invisible machine we rely on to price food, fuel, shelter, and security might cease. When that happens, the ghosts of the VOC parchment, the South Sea certificate, the cancelled railroad share, the Liberty Bond, and that handwritten New York sell order will be in the room. They will remind us that markets have always been tools, sometimes crude, sometimes elegant, for turning human trust and fear into ships, rails, factories, missiles, turbines. They are not natural phenomena. They are designed, maintained, and, in emergencies, switched off. The verdict from this long trail of ink and iron is stark: markets are not neutral casinos, they are war rooms where societies decide, usually without saying so, what they are willing to pay for power, security, and possibility. Hold that verdict up to the present and the reflection is uncomfortable. We live in a world where a trading halt can protect or impoverish millions, where a central bank's balance sheet expansion can mean the difference between a stable democracy and a destabilizing wave of anger, where a pension fund's decision to divest from one industry and double down on another can alter how quickly the planet warms. Yet most of us treat these decisions as technical footnotes, tucked behind acronyms and market jargon. History's fingerprint is all over our daily lives. Every VOC share and war loan and railroad bond has brought us here, to a global system in which a small number of institutions quietly orchestrate the flow of the world's savings, and therefore the shape of its future. We ignore that battlefield at our own risk. So the question becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? One path is resignation, to shrug and say that the machine is too complex, that someone else is at the controls. But the archive of human choices suggests otherwise. People have forced transparency before. They have demanded new rules of engagement when old ones led repeatedly to ruin. They have, at times, insisted that the mobilization of their savings reflect their values as well as their fears. Join the investigation. Start by tracing your own connection to this battlefield. Ask where your pension is invested, what your mutual fund owns, which bonds back your bank account's interest. These questions sound small, but they are the beginning of a map. Talk with others, compare notes, treat prospectuses and policy statements as the dispatches they are. Support those who are trying to decode and reform the plumbing of this system, not out of vague idealism but with the precision of someone examining a weapons safety mechanism. Because every time a market opens or closes, every time a regulator loosens or tightens a rule, every time an investment committee shifts a portfolio, there is a moral choice embedded in the numbers. We rarely see it framed that way. We should. So here is the legacy question this case leaves you with, one no search engine can answer for you. Imagine you are back in that hall in New York on July 31, 1914. The air is heavy, the clock approaching the opening bell. You know that if you keep the market open, prices will plummet, fortunes will be wiped out, but information will flow and principles will be upheld. If you close it, you may save your country's reserves, shield millions from panic, for now, but you will also assert, clearly, that markets are subordinate to state strategy. Your hand is on the rope. Whose risk are you willing to sacrifice, your own, your neighbors, or those of strangers overseas, to fortify your society? And in the quieter crises of our own era, when the war is not declared but the stakes are just as high, how far are you willing to let unseen others deploy your savings in battles you did not choose, before you reach for the rope yourself?